you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you for wanting to listen to me burble on at you for 20 minutes. How many of you, just so I can keep it to 20 minutes, how many of you have no idea who I am at all? Quite a lot. Okay, good. Me neither. So I'm an autism dad, and my son was diagnosed in 2004. I am also a journalist and a writer, and my background is Africa. My family is from Africa. I was born in the UK, but I back and forthed a lot from Africa as a kid. And when I became a journalist, it was natural for me to work down there. And I got involved in advocating for the rights of hunting and gathering tribes who'd lost their land and helping them get their land back. So imagine if you were in America 150 years ago with no Indian reservations. There'd have been some blokes that came along and sort of helped get that together. That would have been me and people like me in Africa still now. And because of that, I wrote this book, which I'll shamelessly try to flog to you later, called The Healing Land. And The Healing Land tells the time I spent with the Kalahari Bushmen hunting and gathering peoples who had been kicked off their land illegally and needed to go back, and I got involved in helping them do that. And they are an interesting people. They're the oldest people on the planet. We all share DNA with them. There's no known culture older than them. And they have a culture that largely is based around healing and peacemaking. They don't make war, they have gender equality, they do all the things that we want to do. And they've been doing them for about 200,000 years. So it's good to know where we get our system of ethics from. Okay, the year that my son was diagnosed, 2004, I had to bring a delegation of these guys to the United Nations and the US State Department. Some of those guys were trained healers in their culture, and they met my son and did some quote-unquote work on him, which means they prayed, really. But they got kind of an interesting result. Some of my son's more obsessive symptoms went away for a bit. Not forever, but for a bit. And I thought, that's interesting. The same year, something else rather momentous in my life happened. I've always been a horse guy. I was brought up with horses. I've trained horses professionally all my life. But I thought my son was not safe around horses because of his wild behaviors. So I'd actually stopped riding, which is a bad thing for me because I have a slightly squiffy brain and I can disappear down a bottle quite fast. So if I get depressed, I am subject to depression. I can start to behave rather dysfunctionally. In fact, I like to say that I put the fun back in dysfunction. That's what I think. What other people think, of course, is probably the truth. So something rather wonderful happened. Because I'm a journalist, I'm a trained observer. I observed that my son did better outside. He simply was better outside. He didn't tantrum as much when he was in the woods behind our house. So I was in the woods with him all the time because that's what worked. And because he wasn't really verbal, I followed his body, kinetics, movement, because he could only show me by moving towards something or away from something if that was something he liked or wanted or not. And we were doing all the orthodox therapies you can think of. I won't bore you for 3 hours with what they all were, but we all know what they are. And we were not getting bad results. We were getting, I'd say, middling results. But the speech was not coming, and the speech therapist gave up on him one week. That same week, we were out in the woods, and my son, instead of going right on the path as normal, went left. And before I could grab him, he went through the undergrowth, through my neighbor's fence, where all 5 of my neighbor's horses were grazing right by the fence. And he threw himself under their hooves on his back. And that's a rather worrying situation with a 2-year-old, So I'm creeping up to the fence. I think he's going to get killed, and to pull him out. But in fact, something rather wonderful happened. He didn't get killed. The lead mare of that, the alpha mare of that herd, who's an absolute cow, but a cow that I'm very, very grateful to. There's no creature on the planet, no living being on the planet that I'm more grateful to than this horse called Betsy. Very sort of gently nudged the other horses off with her nose, which is not normal behavior for Betsy, nor she would have given tooth and hoof, which would have resulted in my son being trampled. So she modified her behavior. This was interesting. And then she bent her head to him and began to lick and chew and half close the eye. And if you know horses, then you know that that's a submission and an acceptance gesture, not unlike a dog showing its belly. There are many ways as a horse trainer you can get a horse to do this, but I hadn't seen a horse spontaneously offer this behavior to a Homo sapiens sapiens, i.e. us, before, much less a babbling autistic 2.5-year-old one. So I thought, well, this is interesting. There's some direct line to them. And because I'm an observer, and he wanted to go back and back to her, we went back and back. And then he would get next to her and he would do this with his body. So, okay, he wanted to be up. I knew she was a nice, quiet mare, so I would let him lie on her like this, and I would keep my hand on his body like that, in case he needed to be pulled away. And all his stimming would stop. And this was interesting. Still didn't occur to me to ride with him at that point, because I grew up in England where we don't ride with kids because we have English saddles. They fall out the front if you do that. But I live in Texas now, and in Texas, as you can see, you know, a nice big Western saddle, plenty of room for two. I put my son up there. The first day I put my son up there with me, we were riding, I was looking for inspiration, and I always used to talk to my son as if he was verbal. We'd be outside and go, oh, look, there's the sky. It's blue. What is blue? What is the sky? What are the colors on the spectrum? What is oxygen? What's the atmosphere? What's the pulmonary system? I'd be like NPR on in the background, because I sort of, partly because I can't stop talking, and partly because I assumed, rightly as it turned out, that he had more receptive language, he could understand more, than he had expressive language, than he could speak. And this often is the case with autism. So I'm up there searching for inspiration, and he had a bit of echolalia at the time. Who does not know what echolalia is? This is an autism conference. You high schoolers up there do not know what echolalia is. Come on, just admit it. Put your hands up. It's fine. You don't have to pretend you know. It's fine. I'll tell you. That's how you find out information. Okay. No one's going to give you a spank bottom if you don't know things. You know what I'm saying? In my old school they did, but not in yours. It's more enlightened these days. So echolalia is where they repeat stuff they've heard, but they don't necessarily understand what it is they're saying. So they could repeat perhaps half of a Thomas the Tank Engine video or a song, or the last 3 words that you've said. But they can't say, Mummy, I'm hungry, Mummy, I'm thirsty, Mummy, I need the toilet, Mummy, I love you. However, I'm up there searching for inspiration. I'm like, should we go to the woods or the pond? Because I could see both. And he goes, to the pond, which is classic echolalia. So I thought, well, it doesn't mean anything, but it's better than a kick in the face. All right, we'll ride down to the pond. And we get down to the pond, and this big blue heron flaps away. And he said heron, and I didn't know he knew that word. I'm like, bleep! He's bleep, 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 because I'm British, potty mouth. He's talking, and I noticed very quickly that the more I went at the trot than the walk, the more speech I got, and the more I went at the canter, the lope, as you call it in Western riding, the more I got. I didn't know why, but I knew it was working. We lived in the saddle for about 3.5 years. I mean, up to about 3-4 hours a day. And he learned to read up there. I would paint letters on trees. And he was into the Lion King, so I'd do an S and an I, an M and a B, and round the corner an A, and there'd be a little Simba toy there. And we would count the footfalls of the horse, because I had to retrain the horse to be more collected, to be more balanced, because she was a little unsafe to ride at the beginning. And he started to learn to count that way. And then I started to teach him how to add and subtract the footfalls, and add and subtract things on the ground, and ride away from things and towards things. They got bigger and smaller, and basic physics and so on. And lots of toilet humor, because the horse would poo all the time. How many of you can say the word poo? Oh, that's a bit lackluster, wasn't it? So, can we have poo? Poo! Poo! Thank you. Feels good, doesn't it? It goes in, it goes down. It's physics. Something happens in there. It's chemistry. Something comes out and something stays in. It's biology. You can teach every natural science through the human digestive system. Plus, it's funny. And laughter is verbal communication. Okay, so this is a good thing. So I had stumbled into something. And then we did something rather crazy. Here's the next thing I'm going to try and flog to you. We rode across Mongolia together. And we wrote a book about it. We made a film about it. And because of this experience I'd had with shamans, with these traditional healers, I wanted to go to a place that would combine horses and that. So we rode from traditional healer to traditional healing. We ended up in Siberia with the reindeer people on the Russian border in the forests there. And when we came out of there, Rowan was still autistic, by then I had lost any desire for him to be not autistic anymore. But he had lost his 3 key dysfunctions, his incontinence, his tantruming, and his inability to make friends. He left those behind him. And he came back as this really sort of functional, but very quirky autistic boy. And then I thought, was it just him or was it other kids? So I got curious and I started running unofficial play dates in the neighborhood for other kids on the spectrum. And sure enough, I got the same effects with them with what we were doing with the horse. And then I opened a little center. And we got overwhelmed immediately because one child in 68 over the age of 8, one boy in 56 over the age of 8 on the autism spectrum now. All of you high schoolers up there, strong chance when you have kids that they will be on the autism spectrum. That's why it's a good job you're sitting here, because it's a good thing to have some prior knowledge. And if it's not you, it'll be your friend or your sister or someone, and you'll be there in a support role. Guess what? It's actually a good thing. Autism is actually a good thing. Rather like poo. Okay, it is, and we'll get into why in a moment. So, they just don't present it to us like that. I don't know why they don't, but they don't. So, we start this program, and we realize it comes down to 6 things. You've got to put the kid in the right environment, no bad sensory triggers. An environment where you can say yes to everything, because you're trying to get this child to communicate to you. You serve the whole family, so the siblings get riding lessons, get football, get karate, so everyone's needs are met. Then we work on the sensory issues, calming all the stimming down, body to body on the horse. And then we go to the back riding with the child in the saddle with us, in collection, in these beautiful rhythms, never leading the horse. Because if you ride in these lovely rhythms, your hips rock, and it makes you feel good, right? When your hips rock. Can we think of things where you rock your hips in rhythm that feel good? Yes? Get your minds out of the gutter. I'm talking about dancing. You know, the reason it feels good is it fills your body with a feel-good hormone and a communication hormone called oxytocin, the opposite of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And people on the autism spectrum tend to produce more stress hormone than people not on the autism spectrum. They often have an overdeveloped amygdala. Dr. Temple Grandin has put herself up for an fMRI. Lots of other adult autists have, and often we find an overdeveloped amygdala, fight, flight, and freeze response, anxiety, cortisol, stress hormone. You counteract this with the oxytocin. You're more than that, though. You're a voice in the child's ear, not the challenging frontal gaze that he has to defend himself from. And you give them deep pressure, and then you go out into the outside world. What does autism mean? Auto, Greek word, the self, automobile, self-propelled machine. Automatic, moves by itself. Autism, selfism, locked within the self. The horse carries us into the exterior world, effortlessly, delightfully, filling us with this feel-good hormone. Amazing. Then we started doing all these perspective-taking exercises and academics, and now we're teaching fractions and rule-based games. And I ride halfway round, and I ride quarter-way round, and we do it kinetically with our bodies. 2 weeks later, it translates to paper. Amazing. And then by the time the kid is getting too big to share the saddle with us, self-advocacy, we start getting them to teach us about what interests them. So we spawned this thing called Horseboy method, and we started teaching other equine professionals how to do this. And it's spread, it's in 11 countries now. But there's a problem with that. It involves a horse. How many of you own horses? Right. So if this is just something that works on horses, how is this possibly any use to any of you sitting here? So people started writing to us saying, well, it's all very well for you guys. You live in the countryside in Texas, but what about us? You know, we live in London or Birmingham or wherever. We thought, you know what, you're right. So what's going on? Well, fortunately, Rowan's mum is a professor of psychology at developmental psychology and the Department of Education at the University of Texas. So we had access to some scientists. And we said, what's going on? Why are we getting all this universal response and communication through this particular way of moving on the horse? It was them who identified the oxytocin effect. More than that, though, with the oxytocin came a calming down of the nervous system. We know that kids on the spectrum have a lot of trouble with sensory bad stuff. That comes out of the picture. The amygdala calms down, but then other things happen. the cerebellum gets activated through this type of movement. And the cerebellum does lots of things, but the most amazing thing it does for us is it spawns a matrix of cells in the brain that make the different parts of the brain talk to each other properly, called Purkinje cells. Funny name, Purkinje. Purkinje. Should be Pookinje, right? We'd remember it better, wouldn't we? And those fire up the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is responsible for reason and emotional regulation. Oh, amazing. That's our holy grail, isn't it? And it gets the vestibular system going, which is attention. So suddenly the child is in this ideal position to receive, but much, much more importantly, to retain, to keep information. If you guys were able to do rocking balancing things while I'm talking, you probably remember what I said. But I know when you go out of here, you go, zoop. I don't know what the bloke said. He had long hair. That's all I can remember. And he said poo a lot. So we evolved a homeschool system because that's what we were doing with my son anyway. 90% of the time he wasn't on the horse. And we generalized what was going on with the horse over to play equipment, to playing over obstacle courses in the living room. And we began to teach him right through the K through 12. And we now have this system called Horseboy Learning. We collaborate with 5 different universities around the world and physicists and mathematicians and so on to adapt the K through 12 curriculum kinetically, outside, in nature, running around, having a good time, laughing about poo. We must laugh about poo because it's the natural sciences. If we want kids to learn the natural sciences, that's how they're going to learn it. Also, in a straight-laced and conservative and rule-based society like our own, which is why autistic kids have a hard time in our society, to talk about poo or to make a toilet humor joke is an act of rebellion. And as we were taught earlier, we need to rebel a little bit, don't we? Because if you appeal to a child's sense of rebellion and anarchy, you appeal to their sense of creativity, and they will never resist anything that you teach them. So, no, we're not learning physics, we're talking about poo. It goes in, it goes down, there's peristalsis, there's the sphincter effect and all of these things, and gravity comes into play, and what is that? And then something happens in there that's chemical. What are the chemicals and the hormones that digestion, and then what creates the actual poo, and what is it, and so on. Suddenly we have kids learning math, science, and they don't even know they're learning it. It's amazing. Say poo again, just to please. Go on. Poo. Thank you. That's a proper one. A pooper one. All right. So even then, we're like, well, even that's not enough, because how many people are honestly going to homeschool? It's a hell of a schlep to homeschool. Most people can't do it. And most people have to work in classroom environments. So we thought, okay, what we need to do is we need to distill the whole thing down to its essence. And we came up with this thing called movement method. And movement method, any of you can do it anytime. It's the basic brain training. It's deactivating your amygdala, calming down your nervous system, getting yourself with the oxytocin, that's nice. Firing up the old cerebellum, the Purkinje cells, the prefrontal cortex, reason, emotional regulation, good things if you want to survive on planet Earth. And the vestibular system, so you can pay attention to what you learn and you keep it. And this we now teach to all the parents that come, and we teach school teachers how to do it, and we teach the school kids themselves, and everyone can be completely independent. You can do this in your own living room, you can do this in a car ride. You just have to understand these 5 or 6 main ways to move, and it's fine. That's movement method, and we talk about it in my last book, which I shamelessly try to flog you. By the way, I'm trying to shamelessly flog you these books because at our center in Texas, we serve kids completely for free. It's free. We don't charge anything. And for the reason, we've learned through some of the people talking, and a lot of your own experiences confirm this, it's really, really, really expensive to be a special needs parent, isn't it? Isn't it? It's ruinously expensive. It's cripplingly expensive. It's obscenely expensive. Why do these therapies have to cost $30,000 to $100,000 a year? I'm a journalist. I know bleep when I smell it. And if it works that well, why don't we see it work more? Why are the kids struggling with these things? And why aren't they all turning out like our man earlier who was giving us the physics lesson? He turned out like he did because of his mum and his own natural spirit. But if she hadn't been brave enough to know when she smelled it and be willing to go against society in that way, it wouldn't have happened, couldn't have happened. Lots of very intelligent people beat down. And us, I don't want to charge the kids to come and the families to come, so that's why I want you to buy my books. However, I don't insist that you do. What I do insist that you do is let kids move. Let kids dream. Let kids have fun. Come up with your own solutions, just like a lot of the people have that we've been listening to today. Because ultimately, that's about love, isn't it? Ultimately, we just want to love our children and we want to love our life. And again, as we were told earlier, we don't want to deny them their childhood, and there's no need to. We do not need to be fear-mongered. All we need is each other, to back each other up, be at each other's back, let each other make some mistakes, not punish each other on Facebook when we do, and go into this next generation realizing that autism is a great thing. These gifts, the lack of ego, extraordinary. The amazing intellect, extraordinary. The ability to concentrate on the job at hand without worrying about, is he better than me, fitter than me, more money than me, taller than me, slimmer than me, better looking than me, bigger boobs than me, whatever. I'm getting my man boobs now, it's terrible. But you know what I'm saying? They don't do this. They have much to teach us. So I want to leave you with one thought. Who's the therapist? Should I be paying $100 an hour to work with these kids because they don't activate my ego? I actually get a break from myself when I work with them. That's the best therapy any neurotypical can have. Being neurotypical is not a holy grail. Plenty of neurotypicals every day throwing themselves off bridges because they feel they don't measure up to society. Autists can really help us. When you go back to these original societies, the people who are the shamans and the healers usually exhibit neuropsychiatric symptoms. Adult autism, epilepsy, bipolar, schizophrenia, often to the degree that they would be institutionalized in our culture. There it's a job qualification, and they're very successful, these people. Do we have something we could learn here? I think we do. So follow your hearts. When you go home tonight, ask yourself this one question. What are my dreams? These kids are like dream whisperers. If you put your dreams into the service of their dreams, the dreams of people more vulnerable than ourselves, they make your dreams start to come true. And we know what happens to dreams in life. Dream comes along, life goes, kicks it along, buries it, and that's heartbreaking, isn't it? But the dream doesn't go away. That's actually a fertilization process. It puts down roots, and all it needs is a bit of moisture, usually tears, sweat, blood, and it comes back up. And that's what allows you to keep going and not burn out. So it's a two-way street. So when you go to bed tonight, ask yourself, what are my dreams? You might have forgotten because of that heartbreaking process. 36 hours after you ask yourself that, it'll go like this. Bubble, 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 ping. Oh yeah, that was it. And immediately you go, oh, you push it away. I can't have it. This time, the rules are different. This time, you can have it. This time, you will have it. This time, you must have it, or you will not be able to do the work that's in front of you. We're autism parents. We've got to go beyond the grave into caring for our kids. That's what's going to keep you going. So what are your dreams? What are your dreams? And that's all I've got. Thank you. Thank you.